Hello everyone and welcome back to another session of Elden Ring PvP and another weapon showcase. Today we are taking a look at the Rusted Anchor. This is probably my favorite weapon in the game at this point in time, and there's a good number of reasons for that, but the big reason is the big damage. Let's get started with the basics. First and foremost, this weapon is dropped by the Scaly Mistbegotten in the Morn Tunnel. I'll have an image on screen showing the location of that tunnel. With this weapon, it requires 26 strength and 9 dexterity to wield. It weighs 12.5 units, and it has Barbaric Roar on by default, but as you can see, I put on Warcry, and the reason for that is pretty clear, I would say. At plus 25, the weapon on the heavy upgrade path has a base damage of 312 and an A scaling in strength. This weapon is so much fun to use, and Warcry I feel like really helps out with that. There are some other options that you will see people use when they're using this weapon. Spinning Slash and Sword Dance are two of the more popular ones, but sometimes you just need a good scream, and Warcry delivers on that. So, the big pro of the weapon is the damage, of course. There's really not much of a shock with that, and the reason for that, well, we'll get into. The first thing is that this weapon, on all of its attacks, works with the Spear Talisman. All of its attacks are piercing damage, so they all benefit from that bonus. On top of that, the motion values on this weapon are insane. I mentioned motion values a few times in the past, but basically they are what take your attack rating and calculate it against your opponent's defenses. There's more to it than that, but that's a very basic explanation. It's why attack rating isn't the end-all be-all for anything in this game. All of its attacks, excluding the one-handed R1s and the one-handed R2s, unless they are charged one-handed R2s, have the highest motion values for this weapon class. On top of that, the charged two-handed R2 has the highest motion value in the game, meaning this weapon hurts. It hits hard, and you don't want to trade with it, because then you have the unfortunate experience of giving your opponent bonus damage from having a Spear Talisman. Needless to say, if you see someone using this weapon, play carefully, because otherwise you're going to get hurt. So that's the damage aspect of this weapon summarized. With the moveset, its running R2s are great. They are good at what they do because they actually are a sweeping attack, and they're good for chasing people down because of that. It's rolling R1s, and both with the rolling R1s, one-handed and two-handed, just to clarify, both of those do come out surprisingly quick. Crouch attacks are the exact same, so again, they will activate surprisingly quickly. You'll hit your opponent faster than they expect, and again, are great for trading hits. Overall, phenomenal weapon. The damage really does shine. Warcry is nice on it, in my opinion, because you can chase your opponent down with it, and you do get the benefit of charging your attack, so on top of the already insane motion value, and the fact that you will be at least trying to aim for a trade with the Spear Talisman on, you also benefit from the Axe Talisman for charging your attacks. The damage you can deal with this weapon can't be undersold. It is absolutely insane if the conditions align properly and if you time everything well with your attacks. But there are some cons. First and foremost, most of its attacks are a bit slower. The crouch attack and rolling attack are kind of an exception to that. The backstep R1 when two-handed is also an exception to that, I would say. I like that attack a lot, especially if you do a little ravioli step to cover some extra distance. It's good. But overall, the weapon, it's a great axe. It's going to be a bit slow, and that's okay. But it is a con. Aside from that, the weapon itself doesn't really have the greatest reach, but again, that's pretty standard. It doesn't have a long poking attack like a greatsword would, and against halberds and spears, you're going to have a little bit harder of a time getting into your opponent's range. That said, because you have some pretty great hyper armor with this thing, you can manage. Overall, a phenomenal weapon, and there are ways that you can mitigate those cons that I had mentioned. you could use a different Ash of War, like I had mentioned previously. Sword Dance has great forward momentum and speed, and it still has a good bit of hyper armor on it as well, so you can get in range and trade hits with your opponent. Spinning Slash is another good one because of its speed, and it doesn't have as much in the way of forward momentum, but it's still a good attack regardless. Those are two very common Ashes of War you'll see when people use this weapon. I personally like Warcry a lot because you get to charge in and it covers that distance, and the hyper armor on a Warcry charged R2 is just absolutely insane. I'll put a little link in the comments showing just how crazy it really truly is. But yeah, check out that video on the link. You'll appreciate it if you like this weapon. Overall, though, really great weapon to use. The only other con that I can personally think of for this weapon is that the weight is a little bit higher. It's in a three-way tie for the second heaviest in its class, but you're using great axes, so you know what you're getting into when you're looking at using a weapon like this. You're expecting the weight to be there. So really, I don't think it's that big of a deal, just to be perfectly honest. It's a fun weapon to use. The damage, I just keep coming back to it, is absolutely insane. You'll just hit people for 1500 damage on the regular. So if you're using it, aim for those counter hits. If you're fighting it, aim to not be hit with a counter hit because you will regret it. And just be mindful playing with it and playing against it. That's really all I can say. You need to be careful, and it just kind of is what it is. So, yeah. That's really all I've got. There are 2 fights left after this one. If you guys want to stick around, then stick around. If you don't, then don't. I'd appreciate it if you did. I'd appreciate it if you did all the YouTube things. Give a like, subscribe, do all that stuff that people do. Thank you all for stopping by. I'll see you next time.